Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking the Avijja Sutta, which is this absolutely fascinating ancient Buddhist text. And what I love about this is that it doesn't just talk about enlightenment in vague, mystical terms. Instead, it actually details a highly practical, step-by-step framework for overcoming fundamental ignorance. Literally, if you've ever felt completely trapped by your own knee-jerk reactions or just totally overwhelmed by sensory overload, this text offers a very specific psychological mechanism to help you break free. We're going to be looking at the translation by Thanissaro Bhikkhu because it really perfectly captures the incredible precision of this teaching.
Right out of the gate, we drop right into the action with this beautifully direct question. A monk approaches the Buddha, sits down, and essentially just asks for the bottom line. He says, "Lord, is there any one thing with whose abandoning in a monk ignorance is abandoned and clear knowing arises?" It's such a great question because the monk is looking for that single key to unlocking clear knowing. He wants the root cause. The idea is that if we can just find that one linchpin to pull out, the entire structure of our confusion is just going to collapse.
So let's get right into the first part of this, the problem of ignorance, and finding that root cause.
Let's look at the Buddha's response here, because it introduces a really fascinating paradox about human understanding. He replies, "Ignorance, monk, is the one thing with whose abandoning in a monk ignorance is abandoned and clear knowing arises." Okay, sounds a little circular, right? To get rid of ignorance, you just have to abandon ignorance. But he's actually pointing out something super profound. You cannot hack your way around this problem. You literally have to target the ignorance directly.
Now, what's really interesting here is the translator's note on the text. Thanissaro Bhikkhu explains that ignorance isn't just a simple lack of facts. It's not like, forgetting the capital of France or something. It is so fundamental to how we operate that it has to be attacked directly. Think of it like a foundational flaw in our operating system. You can't just fix it by downloading a new app. You actually have to go deep into the root code and address the ignorance itself.
Which brings us to our next point, unworthy of attachment, which is quite a radical premise.
So, how exactly does one execute this direct psychological attack? Well, the monk asks this follow-up, and the Buddha reveals that it all begins by hearing and deeply internalizing this single radical premise. All things are unworthy of attachment. Just pause and think about the weight of that statement for a second. All things. This is the starting line for the entire framework. Before you can observe your mind, before you can achieve clear knowing, you have to genuinely entertain the idea that absolutely nothing in your experience is actually worth clinging to.
From there, we can kind of see how this mindset builds. The sutta outlines a very specific chain reaction of internal actions. It moves from simply hearing the teaching, that everything is unworthy of attachment, to directly knowing everything. From directly knowing, the practitioner then moves to comprehending everything. And finally, from comprehending, they arrive at the ultimate perception, seeing all themes or all objects as something completely separate. So it's a progression, right? Moving from a basic intellectual understanding to a profound, lived shift in your perspective.
This final, absolutely crucial step really hinges on the Pali word aññatto. Literally, this translates as other, or as Thanissaro Bhikkhu translates it for this context, something separate. This instructs the practitioner to view things totally differently from how ordinary beings view them. Normally, we completely fuse with our experiences, don't we? We say things like, "I am angry," or "I am in pain." But the aññatto mindset trains you to view the anger or the pain as other, basically as a completely separate event happening within the environment of your awareness, not as your core self.
Okay, moving on to the third piece of the puzzle, the six senses framework, where we actually map out this experience.
To actively apply this mindset, the Buddha provides an incredibly meticulous framework. He systematically lists the six senses, and notice that there are six here, not the traditional five we're used to in the West. We've got the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body. But crucially, the Buddha includes the intellect and ideas. Your mind generating thoughts is treated exactly the same as your tongue tasting an apple. These are the specific arenas where we have to practice this psychological separation. A thought isn't you any more than a sound you hear outside your window is you. And this framework then applies a brilliant formula to each and every sense. Look at how meticulously the text breaks this down. You examine the sense organ itself, say the eye or the intellect. Then the object, the visual form or the idea. Then the consciousness of it, the exact moment of contact. And finally, whatever arises in dependence on that contact, the resulting feeling of pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain. It's like this incredibly granular, perfectly organized matrix of human perception. For every single element mapped out in that matrix, whether it's the eye, the visual form, the mental contact, or the painful feeling that follows, the instruction remains absolutely identical. the Buddha repeats, that too, he sees as something separate. Whether you are experiencing a huge surge of joy from a great idea or a sudden flash of physical pain, you apply the exact same label. It is a rigorous, relentless sorting process where literally everything goes into the other bucket.
Finally, let's look at the payoff, attaining clear knowing, and what that ultimate result actually looks like.
So, what is the ultimate result of applying this framework to your daily life? Well, by contrasting the starting state of ignorance with clear knowing, we really see the transformation. Ignorance is basically being helplessly attached to sensory inputs and whatever feelings they happen to trigger. You're just dragged around by pleasure and pain. Clear knowing, on the other hand, is the state achieved by seeing all of those inputs and feelings as something entirely separate. Liberation, according to the sutta, isn't about escaping your senses or somehow magically stopping your thoughts. It's about radically changing your relationship to them.
The sutta concludes with this definitive statement, wrapping right back around to the monk's initial question. This is how a monk knows. This is how a monk sees, so that ignorance is abandoned and clear knowing arises. The Buddha is confirming here that this methodical observation, literally breaking down your senses and labeling every single component and feeling as separate, is the precise, practical mechanism for replacing ignorance with crystal clear clarity.
It's such a powerful blueprint for mental freedom, mapped out over 2 millennia ago, but honestly, it's incredibly relevant for our overstimulated modern minds today. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. The next time you experience a strong feeling today, whether it's an annoying sound, a frustrating idea, or even a physical ache, can you just pause, look at the matrix, and observe it not as you, but simply as something separate? Try it out and just see what happens to your awareness. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.